So it's time that we have a serious, level-headed conversation about the topic of UFO phenomena. That's right, aliens. Have they visited planet Earth or not? In this video, I'm going to outline 3 specific mass UFO sightings witnessed by thousands of people. And at the end of this, you're going to have to ask yourself, well, either it's aliens or top secret technology that's been suppressed from the masses for several decades. Now, before I get into those 3 cases, let me first ask, does anyone else find it interesting that, well, say President Obama, in the beginning of his term, he stated that he had no knowledge of UFO visitation to planet Earth. Then he said he didn't know. And then, just a couple years before he left office, he says, I can't reveal anything. In fact, former President George W. Bush said the same thing earlier this year. I'm not saying nothing. Like, why not just say, I don't know, or no? But to say I can't reveal anything, or I'm not saying anything, like, I don't understand. Like, especially in the case of Obama, who was president at the time. Who's your boss? What do you mean you're not allowed to say anything? Did I misread the Constitution and who's really in charge? But they're not the only presidents to have discussed this. In fact, Jimmy Carter, back when he was governor, he had a UFO sighting, he saw it himself, and there was even a sworn statement to prove it. Or even take President Ronald Reagan. When he was governor of California, he had his pilot follow a white orb. And after a few minutes, he said, quote, it shot up to the heavens, straight into outer space. Like, what is that about? And it's worth mentioning that even Mikhail Gorbachev, who was the president of Russia at the same time as Reagan, made a similar comment about the existence of UFOs. Even take Paul Hellyer, the former defense minister of Canada, who was even acting prime minister at one point, that has stated publicly on numerous occasions that yes, aliens are visiting Earth, there's multiple species, one of which you could walk down the street right next to and you would have no idea that they were an alien, which raises all kinds of questions. Now, whether you believe these people or him, I mean, that's a whole different story, what do I know? But it is interesting. But they're not the only ones, guys. Take John Podesta, chief of staff for Bill Clinton, chief of staff for President Obama, chief of staff for Hillary Clinton during her campaign during this last election. He had stated that his greatest regret was not being able to release UFO files. Now, that could be just some political thing to try and get votes for certain people, but, I mean, he has spoken about it on numerous occasions, and he is certainly a Washington insider, so, I mean, take what you want from that comment. But there have been astronauts that have talked about this. Take, for example, the late Gordon Cooper, who was a Mercury astronaut, who wrote about this in his own book, by the way. I know other astronauts share my feelings. We know the government is sitting on hard evidence of UFOs. He even went on to say, in reference to the Roswell UFO incident, I had a good friend at Roswell, a fellow officer. He had to be careful about what he said, but it sure wasn't a weather balloon, like the Air Force cover story. He made it clear to me that what crashed was a craft of alien origin, and members of the crew were recovered. Or even take the late Edgar Mitchell. I mean, this gentleman was of stand-up character. I recommend you listen to interviews on him and his thoughts on spirituality and the cosmos and everything else. His views differ much from mainstream science, let's just say that. But he did say, I happen to be privileged enough to be in on the fact that we have been visited on this planet and the UFO phenomenon is real. It has been covered up by governments for quite some time now. In fact, he even went on to say that aliens have contacted humans several times, but governments have hidden the knowledge or truth for 60 years. Or even take this last quote. Press pause, read it. I'm going to actually go into it later in this video, but pause it so you can read it on your own for the sake of brevity. But the list goes on. Mercury astronaut Scott Carpenter. At no time when the astronauts were in space were they alone. There was a constant surveillance by UFOs. Or even astronaut Brian O'Leary. For nearly 50 years, the secrecy apparatus within the United States government has kept from the public UFO and alien contact information. We have contact with alien cultures. Now, whether you believe these people or their stories, that's on you. I mean, what do I know? But it was worth sharing. So let me jump into now these mass UFO sightings, starting off with the so-called Foo Fighters that were observed during World War II. Starting in 1944, at least 4 different countries had observed orbs, glowing lights of yellow, red, and orange color following and chasing aircraft from the United States, the Great Britain, Nazi Germany, and even Imperial Japan. And I could have sworn that there was something about a 5th country, France or Russia. I wasn't able to verify. I didn't spend enough time looking into it. But here's the bottom line. These orbs were chasing aircraft. They were fired on numerous occasions to no success. They were quite literally able to outmaneuver machine gun fire. They would circle the aircrafts, they would chase them, and even follow them for as much as 30 minutes on end in some cases. Now, the explanation for this based on the Air Force is that, well, this was maybe ball lightning, which is, of course, an unexplained phenomena and just does not add up when you consider the fact that ball lightning is a quick thing. And, I mean, when you have these objects following aircraft for 30 minutes and doing circles around them, I mean, that's just not the explanation. That doesn't make sense. Or even static discharge off the wingtips. In fact, this is the reason why we have static dischargers, as you've seen on airplanes, to allow the static to discharge from the airplane safely. But that doesn't make sense either, guys. I mean, come on, really? These pilots aren't stupid, and they were from 4 different countries, and they all thought the same thing for decades, actually, which is that it must be top secret enemy aircraft. Well, that turned out not to be true. I mean, here we are 73 years later. And besides, why don't we see this more often? Why haven't we seen this in, I mean, how many times have you flown and you've never seen, glowing orbs of bright color chasing your aircraft or following you around or doing circles around the aircraft? Now let me jump into the second example, the 1952 lights over Washington, D.C. incident. This is pretty incredible. It was observed on 2 different radar systems, from Washington National Airport, which was the name of the airport at the time, and Andrews Air Force Base. Both radars at both control towers observed this. They had objects moving across the radar screen at over 7,000 miles an hour, even doing 90-degree turns at several hundred miles an hour. Oh, and real quick, by the way, when you research this on your own, this photo here is a reanimation. It's not real. It came out a few years ago. That's what people witnessed. That's essentially what it looked like. But that is not a legitimate photograph or video of it, just to let you know. But this entire incident occurred over 4 nights, 2 back-to-back weekends at the end of July in 1952. But what makes this even more interesting is that it was observed from military pilots on the ground as well as in the air, civilian pilots and crews on the ground as well as in the air on all 4 different nights. In fact, it was so serious that they launched fighter jets, P-94s in fact, to go chase them down, but to no success. They were even ordered to shoot these things down, but they couldn't even run them down. They had no chance based on how fast these things were moving. And just like the incidents from 1944, they were described as glowing orbs. They even had a press conference about this at the Pentagon, which was the largest since World War II, and it was held by Major General John Samford. Now, the Air Force has stated multiple explanations for this, one of which was that what you were seeing on radar, even though they've determined that the radar systems were functional and operating without error, that it must be, well, maybe it was related to a temperature inversion. But that's really silly. I mean, yeah, maybe that could cause some issues with the radar systems, but what about all the pilots on the ground, as well as in the air, 4 separate nights that witnessed these events, that were chasing them down and described in epic detail? So, yeah, the temperature inversion thing is silly and it's just a distraction. They've even suggested that it was steamboats moving up the Potomac River headed to Mount Vernon, which is just ridiculous. I mean, that explanation debunks itself. I mean, how many pilots and crew members and people witnessed this? I mean, give me a break. But here's a real curveball in their story. This was witnessed as far away as Franklin, Indiana, which is what, nearly 600 miles away? So yeah, it wasn't temperature inversion, it wasn't a steamboat. Clearly we're being distracted, guys, and this is just along the lines of what Edgar Mitchell said. Quote, "It has been the subject of disinformation in order to deflect attention and create confusion so the truth doesn't come out." So what else could it have been? It's either aliens, beings from other planets, ETs, whatever you want to call them, or top secret technology. It couldn't have been the X-15, there's many reasons why. Hell, even the Astro-71 Blackbird wasn't even conceived on paper for 7 years after this event, and it didn't have its first test flight for nearly a dozen years after that. But besides that, I mean, again, these things were observed moving at several thousand miles an hour and doing 90-degree turns at several hundred miles an hour. The human body could not withstand that many Gs. So what else could it be? A drone? I mean, I don't know if drone technology exists today that could do those kind of maneuvers. If there is, it's top secret. But in 1952, I mean, if that's the case, and we have been left in the dark for far longer than we ever thought possible, and the implications of that are, well, disturbing. I mean, here we are paying, fuel at the pump, record high airfare prices that are based on oil and gas, and yet technology obviously exists that doesn't run on that, if this is indeed top secret technology. So either it's aliens or top secret technology. Either way, the implications are pretty disturbing. The last example is, of course, the 1997 Phoenix Lights incident. This incident happened on March 13th, 1997, and made headlines around the world. It was observed by thousands of people, all the way from Henderson, Nevada, all the way down through Phoenix and Tucson, Arizona. In fact, there's at least 800 statements for witnesses that observed a massive triangle-shaped craft that had 5 lights, and many say was at least a mile wide. They said it was absolutely silent, it moved slowly, and the actual sheer size of it was just breathtaking. In fact, even then Governor Five Symington has come out in the years following stating that he is absolutely convinced that it was an alien craft from some other world. I mean, take it for what it's worth, but he was a captain in the Air Force. He later went on to become a pilot. But what makes this even more interesting is that the big controversy is whether it is military flares or not. Guys, that is part of the distraction. This is exactly what Edgar Mitchell was talking about disinformation and confusion. Because those flares were witnessed at what, 10 p.m.? When this whole event started as early as 6:55 in Henderson, Nevada, was seen in Prescott Valley, was seen in Phoenix by thousands of people hours before the flares. And by the way, look at the photo. You see at least 7 flares there, where an overwhelming amount of the witnesses described 5 lights, not 7. So that whole discussion and debate on flares, not flares, guys, it was both. But for people to witness this event separately during twilight hours when there was still visible light in the sky and they could actually see the silhouette of a black craft with 5 lights directly above them, what in the world was that? And as many people said, at least a mile wide? Wow. So what are the possibilities? Well, either alien craft or beings from other planets, or top secret technology, or both. If you don't buy into the alien argument, you have to ask yourself, well, is the top secret technology possible when you're talking in 1944, what, 73 years ago? Or 1952, lights over D.C. being 65 years ago? Look into the details, guys. Come to your own conclusions. All I know is that the truth is stranger than fiction. I'll leave it at that. I'm Jimmy. This is Bright Insight. Like and subscribe. Leave me a comment. Let me know what your thoughts are. And share any other incidences that are worthy of mention, because I obviously left out many others that are very compelling. So I'll leave it at that. Take care, everybody.